We have not one, but two unusual activities that are in the headlines today, and those who took advantage of them prior are very happy campers today. Bang! Let's get started.
There she blows. I'll tell you what, this guy is on a boat one day. It's not a boat, it's a yacht. Different cities. I mean, you know, some of us are really living the life and some of us are living like crap. I don't know what the heck kind of straw I drew.
Yeah, those two mansions you live in, they're not exactly, they don't exactly suck.
No, you're right. You're right. I got no complaints. I got absolutely no complaints.
Welcome back, folks. He is the bitter Pete Najarian. And I am Jon Najarian, and we welcome you to the Rebel's Edge for March 21st, 2024. We're going to cover some interesting topics today. And remember, today is the last day of the week that we do cover topics for you. Tomorrow, we will be on with Real Vision on how to un-F your future with Raul Powell and a whole bunch of great folks at Real Vision. That should be fun. Make sure you check that out. We'll tweet out something again today about it. Yeah. But we don't do the Rebel's Edge on Fridays. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, yes. Friday, no. So this is the Rebel's Edge, and we're going to dive right into the macro minute. Let's say, Pete, that the Fed speak, the way Jerome Powell delivered what he delivered yesterday, was viewed as dovish, and that's why we had a big rally yesterday, another big rally today. I still think that people are getting ahead of their skis when they're saying we're going to see a June cut, but June is still 3 months out, folks. Let's not forget that. This is March. So we've got a couple meetings before that, and if we get another hot reading, like we've had multiple hot readings, he might push that out to September or not even do it at all. But anyway, that's my macro today, Pete.
I'll jump on that same macro, John, which is about the Fed and about what the chair himself talked about yesterday. I think it's interesting. He did make reference to the idea of 3 cuts this year. Now, if I have to say this again and again and again, I think it makes a lot of sense that people should say, well, Pete might be right on this one. How can they possibly say there's going to be 3 cuts, John? How do they do that? What makes sense out of that? Have we seen any evidence at all recently, at least? Probably not. That's why it was 99% chance that they were going to pause on this past one yesterday. So I still find it interesting that many in the Fed are still talking about, well, we got 3 more cuts. I think you just got to say, you know what? We're data dependent. If we start to see this thing actually get a little bit closer, then yes, then we probably are considering cuts. But we haven't seen that happen yet. And as a matter of fact, in some cases, we've actually seen inflation start to kind of bubble up a little bit. So I don't know. People just have to look at this the right way and understand that for whatever reason, they want to just dangle that out there. But I think the reality is it's pause time until the time is right and until we start to see inflation start to get back down a little bit lower.
Yeah, and we're still pushing, Pete, right back up against some of the highs for the 10-year note, which is basically hovering around 4.285%. But I'm not going to do that for fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
Instead, I am going to say fantastic futures goes right back to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's up $2,700. It's back to 66,000. But obviously that means we were a lot closer, perhaps, Pete, to 62,000 just a little bit ago. It was 14% drop through yesterday, and it went further yesterday, and now we're seeing this rebound today. I am thinking that Bitcoin should be the fantastic future, but I don't know how much longer it's going to keep up this roller coaster of volatility.
It's been volatile. It's been crazy. We talked about it when it hit 73,000. It pulled all the way back over 10,000 lower and then started bouncing back again. It's been volatile. I am going to jump on what you just talked about before that, though, John, the 10-year. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is this. You want to talk about sticky inflation. How about just taking a look over at the 10-year and sort of the different movement that it's had versus the NASDAQ specifically? And when we look at the NASDAQ absolutely ripping to the upside, right? Well, we're still seeing that the 10-year, even though it's been down towards 4, it's right back, as you just said, close to call it 4.3. It's been sticky. It's been very, very sticky. And until that starts to break and we see it actually break down not only to 4, but then get a little bit lower, if that were to be the case, that might shake things up a little bit. But for right now, I think it's really interesting to see where the 10-year is, especially looking at record highs in the S&P, record highs in the Dow, record highs in the NASDAQ. And lo and behold, here's where the 10-year is.
Yeah. And again, I think just as you said, Pete, Powell is the most transparent Fed chair ever, but it is hard for him to look out 3 months into the future and say, yeah, the next 3 jobs reports, the next 3 PCEs or CPI reports are going to be really tame and we're not worried. They might not be worried, but if they get one of those or 2 of those or all 3 of those pretty hot, that is not going to bode well for a June cut. But I don't want to throw too much cold water on it. I'm just saying none of us know what the future holds completely. But you know what we do know, Pete? When people start buying unusual activity, somebody else might know. And we've got 2 examples, starting out with IMVT. So this one, they've got a special antibody treatment basically for an autoimmune disease. And they also have one of Pete's favorites, a big short interest. I'll let him address that. But the unusual activity we had in here, folks, was just a little bit ago. Some people were saying, hey, the stock might be oversold and so forth. 2 days ago, somebody comes in and buys a bunch of upside calls. And the stock jumps, as you see there, 15, almost 16% earlier today. So that was pretty shrewd timing yet again for whoever Bobby Axelrod or whoever this is that's buying these calls, but paid off big. And if you followed us into that trade, you got paid big too.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, Bobby Axelrod is back, and he's back in the markets, John. There's no doubt about that. We've got a couple of them for you today. That was one of them. You were talking about the short interest. Yes, pretty high short interest in this particular name. Also, when you're looking at this as a biotech, it's got a pretty decent balance sheet. It's pretty solid. Cash burn isn't all that high given the fact of what the rest of the balance sheet looks like, but it's about 125 million. So it's a real number. But I think it's really interesting to see how somebody else is out there is struggling a little bit. That actually ends up being very good in the case of this particular drug that we're talking about here. The Japanese company disappointed. That's positive for this. There is a pipeline here, but it's not huge, John. But they've got a couple of different therapies and drugs or whatever you want to call them. They've got a couple that are now at phase 3. So they are getting very, very close to being a company that could get out there, start making some money. They've got, I think, some very promising results that they've had at least up to now. It's worth taking a little bit of an idea, at least a shot, maybe at least a look at what this company is doing, how they're doing it, and why we're getting pretty impressed with where it is right now today on this big jump.
Yep. And remember, go to marketrebellion.com/get started, and you could subscribe to the exact things that we're talking about here, folks. That's marketrebellion.com/get started. All right. Now for the second of those big 2 today, Micron, because Micron was up over 18%. And look at that graph. That's our Market Rebellion AI tool that Jared has up on the screen. AI, artificial intelligence, yeah, that lets us do 35,000 stocks, fundamental, technical, and sentiment. And look at that spike to the upside. Well, turns out, Pete, there were some very active accumulations of calls. Pete and I refer to that as unusual activity. Somebody wanted a leveraged bet to the upside. And look at it, with the stock at 84, with the stock at almost 86, and then with the stock at the end of February at 92. And look at those amounts, especially those first 2, 10,000 contracts. 12,000 contracts. Those are bigger than most of us trade, quite frankly. 12,000 contracts at 100 shares per contract is 1.2 million share equivalent of an $85 stock. That is a big trade, folks. So when we see that, we follow along with it. And guess what? You might have made a nice little score on this one if you had followed us into these. And Micron just blew out the upside of estimates, Pete.
Yep, they absolutely crushed everything from the earnings itself and the revenue and everything, everywhere you wanted to look. But it was also about the guidance, and they're talking about AI. Now, this is something we did bring up quite a while ago now, probably going back to February, but the AI world has an amazing amount of things that they need to be able to do what they do. And one of those is memory. And obviously, this is something that Micron, and they're very focused on this, is doing a really, really good job. I think there are other competitors out there that could jump into this maybe as well, John. Maybe a Western Digital, maybe it's a Seagate, whomever. But right now, Micron is king. They absolutely destroyed everything. The guidance was off the charts. I mean, everywhere you look, they had 2 times normal volume of a full day in the first 30 minutes of the trading day. Gives you a little bit of an idea of how active people really were. We had that unusual option activity, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And I'll tell you what, some of those really did react, John. The one that went all the way out to May, they still have time, so there's still time premium involved with the pricing and the fact that you're actually well into the money now. Those are some big, big moves. These are huge moves, and it's going to be a lot of fun for a lot of people that are going to have smiles on their faces as they go into the weekend for sure.
Oh, you bet. And those people at one point or another, folks, went to marketrebellion.com/get started. That's marketrebellion.com/get started. And you know what? They got started making some big coin. All right, let's jump in, Pete, to LU. This is a Chinese fintech company. It's financial service enabler. That's what they say for small businesses in China. They announced audited financial results for Q4. Cumulative number of borrowers increased 10%. Well, how many is that, John? It's 21 million people that were hitting up their LU site to basically start using those financial services I just spoke of. A phenomenal report. LU put up some pretty scary good numbers, and that's why that one's in the news today, Pete.
Well, not only in the news, John, but it was up as much as 40% or more today. I mean, 40, not 40. This is a stock that absolutely took off. You listen to what the CFO had to say. He talked about how well capitalized they are. They're in the loan business. They've got all these things pretty strapped down pretty nicely. You mentioned it when you're talking about the borrowers up 10%. That's 21 million. We're talking China here, folks. They could get that number up a heck of a lot higher at some point in time if they need to. And wealth management loans, all of this is really, really adding up to something very strong for this company. I think it's something you at least take a peek at because most of us never heard of it before. So you might want to at least investigate, take a little look, get educated and see exactly where they are, maybe what the trajectory is going forward as well. Really, really an impressive quarter. How about this, John? The cash flow for the company is $104 billion with a B, and the cash to debt is $21 billion. So they're sitting pretty. They've got a great balance sheet. And, you know, you take them at their word, but this balance sheet looks pretty phenomenal. If that's really as good as what is being told to us, this is really a company that has some promise, I think, going into the future in China.
No doubt. And I'm giving it a thumbs up as well, Pete.
Thumbs up.
What they've done here with the, and for those who don't follow this, it average trades about 4.5 million shares a day. So far today, it's up over 33 million shares. So there's a lot of people, just because you and I might not have heard of this one much or traded it much, there's a lot of people out there that are getting much more comfortable with it today. And if it gets and holds above 5, a lot more people will be able to hold this one, Pete, on the fund side. So keep an eye on that, folks. All right, FiveBelow. Well, it's kind of below a lot of things, Pete. Big jump in sales. They sold a lot of stuff, but you know what? They were really complaining about theft. And inventory shrinkage, Pete.
I was in the pool.
I was in the pool. It was cold. That's, of course, George Costanza. But shrinkage is a real thing, especially when you're letting people check themselves out of the store. And that's what the CEO said. He said, you know what? This doesn't seem to be working out so swell for us, letting people check themselves out. Maybe they're not running everything through the scanner.
Oh, you think?
You think?
Let me tell you, I've been to Walmart many times in my lifetime. I've been to Target many times. I've not really been to FiveBelow a lot, but I can tell you this, all this self-checkout is nuts. Because, John, how many times have we at least witnessed watching people do one for them, one for me, one for them, one for me, and walking out? I mean, how about for a while we were hearing about people walking out with television sets and all these big things and so forth, but it's just as bad at the self-checkout, and I think that's why Walmart, Target, they're considering the same thing that right now FiveBelow is considering. Hey, should we stop doing what we're doing and go back to the old school of, all right, let my people go through the aisle and make sure everything is right and everything that's going in your bag has been paid for. But the earnings actually, John, were up big year over year, but did miss what they were expecting. The revenue was up about 19%, which was a slight miss of what was expected, but maybe the expectations were just ridiculously high. Now, they've got this shrinkage issue, as you mentioned. The shorts are very happy today, I can tell you that. There was like an 8 or a 9% short interest in this one. I think this is actually not a bad company. I think if they can get things tight and right and do everything the way they need to do it properly, the margins will go up. I think that's going to change the revenue quite a bit. It's going to change a lot about the earnings itself. I think there's a lot of reasons to maybe take a look at this one, maybe from the long side. Not today, but sometime over the next month or two, and we'll see how things go in terms of, are they going to actually shut down this whole shrinkage issue that they've got? Let's call it what it is. People are stealing. It isn't shrinking anything. They're taking something they didn't pay for. I'm not sure if that's shrinkage, John, but that's what everybody wants to call it.
Yeah, and down here, Pete, in Puerto Rico, what they do is they have one person for every 4 terminals. So you've got 4 self-checkout terminals. You can see how that would work out in terms of the employment costs. Instead of having 4 people manning 4 different checkout lanes, you could have one person, and they're more or less sitting there looking at you while you're checking out, Pete, while you're doing the self-checkout. So if it's one for me, one for you, one for me, one for you, they're going to notice it and kind of come over and tap you on the shoulder. Geez.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe, because they also might be on their cell phone, Pete, going, right, let's see, what's for dinner tonight, honey?
I think a lot of that.
A lot of that. All right, let's take off with a little sports, Pete.
All right, real quick, we'll do this one. How about NCAA basketball? We've started. It's exciting. Everybody's talking about it. We've already kicked the whole thing off. John, I thought it would be fun for you and I to determine, okay, let's pick our Final Four. And by the way, we've got an employee, a team member, as it would be, who's got a son who plays for Duquesne. That's pretty cool. I mean, how great is that? UConn, I think, John, is the best team. That's who I have winning it. Now, so does me and everybody else, right? But for the right reasons, when you really break it down, they're dominant. They've been dominant all year. They've only lost a few games. They got depth. They've got consistency. They've got a starting 5 that all equally contribute in terms of rebound, in terms of shot blocking, in terms of shooting 3-pointers. They all can do everything. And that is something that not very many teams, I think, possess. They might have 1 or 2 superstars. These guys got 5. It's pretty incredible. One of their guys, one of their guards, Cam Spencer, he's 44% from 3-point. He's been pretty damn good all year. And I think when you watch this UConn team play, and hopefully I'm not totally wrong, but I think it's good. They're going to play quite a few games, get there probably to the finals, and then we'll see. So here's what I've got. I got your wife's school of Creighton is going up against Duke. And then I've got UConn and Baylor. And the reason I slipped Baylor in there was Baylor, John, just seems to be a basketball team that every single year now is there. Are they a blue blood? No. They're not Kentucky. They're not Duke. They're not some of these schools that are always in. But I'll tell you what, Baylor's getting more and more consistent. More and more great athletes are coming out of Baylor, getting into the NBA. And I'll tell you, they recruit the country probably as good as almost any team that there is, including coming up here to Minnesota and stealing a lot of players and bringing them down there to Baylor and doing a really, really good job. But so that's why I've got my four. I got Creighton, Duke, and I got UConn and Baylor. What about you?
Well, what I'm looking at, Pete, is the Dion effect. Because everybody, of course, was all jacked up about what Dion did for their football team, but they faded pretty bad at the end of the season. And they faded in some great degree because he doesn't have as many top-level, top-tier players. That was true. He's picked up a few more through the portal, but I know this is a basketball discussion. So instead, Pete, I'm looking over at the halo effect. So in other words, Dion really brought a focus on the University of Colorado. So that's Boulder. It's where our daughter goes to school. A lot of people who might not have gone to Colorado for basketball went because of Dion. Look at that team and look at some of the young players on there, Pete. It's not just a senior loaded team or anything like that. But a lot, Colorado's in this thing. And in fact, they're playing tomorrow. They're playing Florida, I believe. So I'd say keep an eye on that, the Dion effect, I'm calling it. I know Pete's got a big thing about Yale because they're also in here, but they're playing Auburn, and Auburn's pretty good.
Pretty damn good.
Pretty damn good. So, but it's impressive that, you know, some of these Ivies, you know, Princeton's made it a bunch of times. To see Yale in here too, Pete, is rather impressive because, quite frankly, they generally don't get the same level of players.
No,
in not all of the Ivies, but you know, these teams. The great thing about basketball is you get one or two really, really superior players. You could make a run at some championships, Ivy or otherwise. Anyway, I don't disagree with your Final Four, Pete. I'd love to see Houston. I'd love to see Colorado make it there. I don't know if either one does, but I know that there are some great teams in here, and I'm excited to watch it.
It reminds me of Gabe Kaplan in Fast Break, John, when he took a job out there in Las Vegas. This is going way, way back. I mean, this is Mr. Cotter, by the way. And he turned out a great team, and he recruited. He got a woman on there, and she had to cover up things and ace manage herself and all this stuff. That was an absolute classic. But like you said, you only need a few players. It's a lot different than football where you really got to have quite a few. But you get basketball, if you can get three real top-end folks, you got yourself a team. All right, John, how about this one? You kind of led me into this a little bit. So the portal and the football portal, I'm going back because we got spring. Matter of fact, my Golden Gophers have their first spring practices today. I'll be over there on Saturday. They asked me to come over, give a little song and dance and all the rest of it, so it should be fun. It's part of the reason I'm up here. But I wanted to point out something that I think a lot of people are probably not noticing. But I'm looking at the portal and who's the winners, right? So normally you and I would be talking about this and we'd say, well, who's number one in the portal? Oh, well, it's probably Bama, USC, Clemson, Michigan, throw in LSU, right? I mean, those are names that are probably going to be doing very, very well in the portal. Well, those names are not even in the top 10. So I'll give you what the top 10 looks like, or at least most of the top 10. Ole Miss sits at number 1. Texas A&M sits at number 2. So you're starting to see a little bit of a theme. Maybe the SEC. I didn't see Georgia in there either, John. So Georgia, Alabama are not in there, but look who is. And I think what we're seeing is a little bit of a turn. Some of these younger coaches that people are very excited about and excited to play for. And you know, we know how well Ole Miss played last year. I think this year they'll be even better. I think Lane Kiffin is really building something there. A lot of different schools tried to steal him. They couldn't get him. Mike Elko, who's now the guy who's taken it over at Texas A&M. He's a young guy. He was a defensive coordinator there a few years ago. I think he was there maybe 3 or 4 years back from like 2018 to 21, something like that. Really a good coach just coming from Duke. But then you've got Oregon. Then you got Florida State. Then you got Louisville. You got Ohio State. You got Texas. I'm not seeing a whole lot of the old guard, really, John. It's kind of like the younger and the newer. I'm not seeing Oklahoma on that list. I'm not seeing Washington on that list. I'm not seeing USC, UCLA. Oregon is on there, but they're about the only one that's moving over from the old Pac-12 into the Big Ten. So I find it pretty daggone interesting. How about you? I mean, Colorado is in there, but they are not where they were last year when they were basically somewhere close to number one the entire year. They have dropped significantly. They are in the top 10, but they are not number one like they were last year in the portal. What do you make of this whole thing?
Well, I always resented the idea that, and I'm a guy that went to multiple colleges. So, of course, Pete, rather than you, a guy that was one and done, I went to at least 3 different colleges. Maybe 4, maybe 5.
5. His nickname was Samsonite.
Yeah, that's right. Always had that luggage packed, ready to go. So I would have loved the portal, quite frankly. And it was interesting, Pete, that Sarkisian, Steve Sarkisian, the coach of the Longhorns, the Texas Longhorns, he was talking, saying how interesting it is that all of a sudden some kid sees you and like says, hey, I'm coming to visit. And it's a kid that you've been playing against. And all of a sudden you're like, is this guy a spy or is he really coming? You know, because he's put his name in the portal. Now, the one thing is, if you put your name in the portal, as Pete knows, folks, but you guys might not, and Pete, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but if you put your name in, your scholarship is forfeit. Now, the other team can offer you a scholarship, and or you could still go back to your same team, but it's up to them if they want to recognize that and give you the scholarship again. So you basically are out when you put your name in the portal, which is interesting because, you know, that's a little bit, I think that keeps as many kids from doing it as would otherwise, Pete. Because if you're sort of a kid on the edge, you think you've got a raw deal at the place where you're at and you want to try someplace else, but you've got a full ride, all of a sudden you're going, well, but are they going to think I'm as good as I think I am?
Yeah.
And that could be a problem. But anyway, I do agree with you, Pete. I'm surprised some of the schools aren't seeing the movement, but you know who I'm not surprised by? Alabama. Yeah. Alabama got a couple kids back from like Ohio State and others, kids that left Bama, went to Ohio State or went to some other school, and now they're transferring back down to Bama. So, you know, if you want to weigh that as these kids know what they're doing, that looks like a really positive for that team as a projection going forward. I would say Bama might look pretty tough again because of a lot of the talent that's come back. And why would they come back? Because they think that team is so loaded that they want to be part of that national championship run.
Yeah, I would never blame a kid for wanting to go back if they wanted to go back. I think there's a mistake sometimes thinking the grass is greener, right? I mean, that's one of the issues and how difficult it is for these coaches. They first go out and recruit the kids, then they get the kids, but then the kids, you got to speak to them the right way, John, because if you coach them and maybe even yell at them, wow, they want to leave. I mean, they've really changed college football. These guys are a different breed. And it makes things a little bit more difficult. And I think we've heard a lot from Nick Saban lately about the portal, about NIL, about all this stuff. And I tend to lean with him. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there who are throwing rocks at him too, John. They're like, yeah, but you did this and you did that. And it's like, well, because it was there to do. Of course he's going to do it. He's going to take advantage of it if it's there. I mean, he'd be a fool not to. But the reality is it's still, he knows it was still something that is still kind of killing college football to some degree. They're still doing everything, a lot of things right, obviously. But I think in terms of, you know, some of these schools and wanting that commitment and having a guy come there, show up there, work his tail off. He maybe doesn't get on the field till his sophomore year, junior year, and then he starts playing football. I mean, you know, that was the old way, but it's changed a lot, and these guys all want everything right now. Matter of fact, you probably saw this, John, but Nick Saban was telling the story about, you know, a lot of the families would come there and they'd go, look, we don't really care about the rest of it. How much money are you going to give my kid?
Yeah.
Really? That's your biggest worry, huh? That's the biggest worry.
And anyway, I was surprised. I saw that interview, Pete, and I heard him talking about how he and his wife would have a lot of the kids from outside the state in particular over to their house for breakfast and things like that, so he could kind of mentor them as well as coach them. And then he said, all of a sudden, they're all just asking me, how much money are you going to give me? And his wife said, do you really still want to do this?
Yeah.
And you've made $11 million a year for a decade now. We can just kind of hang out on the boat and have a great life. Do you really need to have a bunch of 18 and 20-year-olds telling you need to pay them more?
Well, I'll tell you, Nick Saban's he's still going to be working though, John. He's going to be part of that whole, crew on Saturday mornings. And that, I can tell you firsthand, that is a lot of work. I mean, to get ready for all those games that are kicking off and being able to be hopefully, pretty intelligent about what you're saying about each and every one of the players and the teams and the coaches and everything else. He's going to be doing a lot of work. It's he might be almost as much work as being a head coach at Bama.
Yeah, not as much work as being the offensive or defensive coordinator, but probably as much work as being the head coach. And I'm not downgrading head coaches. I'm just saying that the position coaches, I think, are the ones that are putting in 19-hour days and things like that, getting ready for the next one. Anyway, we're going to be getting ready for the next one too, folks. Remember, go to marketrebellion.com/get started to see about our subscriptions, our education. We'll be posting up about us being on with Real Vision tomorrow, how to un-F your future. And we'll be back Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope you have a great weekend. See you Monday.